Good afternoon. I would like to call the Planning Commission meeting to order. It is 4:30 on Thursday, January 25th, 2024. I'd like to start the meeting by welcoming Linda Beck to our commission. If everyone would kind of go around the room, please, and introduce yourself so Linda knows who you are.
Joe Shasko.
Michelle Sellner.
I'm Ann Earl.
Larry Mack.
Bobby Four.
Okay, and Linda Beck, here I am.
Welcome.
Thank you, thank you.
First item on the agenda is approval of the minutes for the December 28th, 2023 meeting. Are there any corrections, additions? If not, we have a motion.
I'll offer a motion to approve as presented.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second to approve. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes have been approved. This opens the public hearing portion of the meeting, talking about the zoning amendment for footings and foundations. City report.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. John Nisley, planner with the City of New Ulm. This is an ordinance amending Section 10.12 of Appendix A, the zoning ordinance of the City Code. The applicant for this zoning amendment is the City of New Ulm building official. So property owner, legal description, street address does not apply. This ordinance change would apply citywide. Again, where does the zoning amendment affect zoning districts? It affects all zoning districts, whether it's residential, commercial, or industrial. Notice was published in the Journal on January 13th, 2024, and mailed to 3 known demolition contractors located in the New Ulm area. Currently, we haven't heard anything back from the public or those contractors. So the description of the proposed zoning ordinance changes. It is to amend Section 10.12 of the zoning ordinance, which would include the following. 1, Section 10.12 General Regulations of Appendix A is the section of the zoning ordinance that is intended to address various situations or regulations that are generally applicable across all zoning districts. Many of the regulations in Section 10.12 deal with building-related items that pertain to zoning regulations. So it's kind of our catch-all section of the zoning ordinance. To require the removal of footings and foundations and all demolition debris during the demolition process, the Minnesota State Building Code states that where a structure has been demolished or removed, the vacant lot shall be filled and maintained to the existing grade in accordance with the ordinance of the local jurisdiction having authority. So they're putting the onus back on the city to deal with something like removal of footing and foundation or other demolition debris. New Ulm City building officials have encountered situations where new buildings are being proposed and the initial excavations reveal the presence of existing or old footings, foundations, or other demolition debris that were buried and not visible at the soil surface. When old footings, foundations, or other demolition debris are found during the excavation for a new building, those items are to be removed prior to the construction of a new building on the site. Having to remove existing footings, foundations, or other demolition debris on a site can be very costly to the property owner. In particular, if the property owner was previously unaware of the footings and foundations on the site. So in your packet, attachment number 2 is a photo that was taken in Green Bay when they were doing excavations to build a new multifamily complex. That was 2014. They discovered old footings that were underneath the soil surface. The property owner was unaware of it. The city was unaware of it, and it ended up costing the developer $250,000 to remove footings and foundations even prior to construction on the site. So there are no requirements in the state building code or zoning ordinance that require a property owner to declare the existence of buried footings, foundations, or other demolition debris on a site. The purchaser would either have to know about asking the question to the seller or explore the site through soil borings prior to the purchase of a property. So the purpose of this zoning amendment is to establish regulation requiring the removal of footings, foundations, and/or demolition debris during the demolition process. Additionally, this would help avoid unknown costs to a new property owner who may be unaware of existing footings, foundations, or other demolition debris when proposing construction on a site. City staff has spent time reviewing various options to address footings, foundations, or other demolition debris left by previous landowners and found that a requirement to remove during the initial demolition process is the most logical and cost-effective method. That's because when they are going to propose demolition on a site, they come up to our office and request a demolition permit. And through that permitting process, we can make sure that they are aware of this ordinance regulation. This regulation would pertain to any new demolition being conducted, as well as when footing, foundation, or demolition debris have been discovered during an excavation for the construction of a new building. We have 3 attachments. Attachment number 1 is the proposed new ordinance. Attachment number 2 are photo examples of buried footings and foundations. Again, those pictures were taken from Green Bay, Wisconsin. And attachment number 3 is findings of fact. You might have the question on why are we addressing this in the zoning ordinance versus the city code? Well, the answer to that is when we are working with contractors in the area, we're often referencing the zoning ordinance before we go to the city code for anything. So, but in this situation, we are going to have this regulation not only noted in the Appendix A of the zoning ordinance. In the beginning of February, the first city council meeting, it'll also be requested that this amendment gets made part of the city code as well. So it'll also be in Chapter 11 of the city code in both locations.
That's smart.
So following the public hearing, the Planning Commission shall adopt findings of fact and recommend using each of the review criteria outlined in Section 2.4B5 of the zoning ordinance. Recommendations and decisions on zoning amendments shall be based on considerations on the following review criteria. A, whether the proposed amendment corrects an error in the original text or map. B, whether the proposed amendment addresses a need arising from changing conditions, trends, or facts affecting the subject property and/or surrounding area. And C, whether the proposed amendment is consistent with achieving goals and objectives outlined in the comprehensive plan. City Council may adopt the amendment and/or any part thereof in such form as it deems advisable. A decision on any request shall be accompanied by findings of fact. As part of the approval process, the City Council will direct the City Attorney to prepare an ordinance identifying the changes to be made in Appendix A. City Attorney has already drafted that ordinance, and it's in your packet. The City Council will conduct 2 considerations of the ordinance. Following the second consideration, the City Council will vote on the ordinance amendment. An amendment requires the approval of 4/5 of all the members of the City Council. The amendment is effective 30 days after its publication in the Journal. So Planning Commission considerations. Does the Planning Commission believe that the proposed amendment complies with the review criteria outlined in Appendix A? Are there additional or fewer requirements the Planning Commission would like to see incorporated into the amendment? This would probably be a good time to go through the findings of fact regarding, actually, let's back up. Before we make a decision and vote on approving or not approving of the amendment, then we'll read the findings of fact. Staff would recommend approval of the zoning ordinance amendments described in the proposed ordinance. The ordinance would allow staff to deal with the removal of footings and foundations during the demolition process. The proposed regulation is simple and straightforward way to address an existing problem. And then we have 2 potential motions, one to approve the amendment and one to deny the amendment. That concludes the staff report.
If it is okay with commission, I would also agree that since we don't have an audience, that we go through the finding of facts so that we can ask all the questions that we have at that time when we're making the decision, rather than closing the public hearing part of the meeting. So the finding of fact form is on page 8, starting. Do you want me to read you the questions, John, or do you want to go
Sure.
through the whole thing?
That'd be great.
Is everyone okay with that? All right, thank you. In your opinion, does the proposed amendment correct an error in the original text or map? The answer is there's no.
Yep, staff responded, no, the proposed amendment does not correct an error in the original text or map.
Okay, question number 2. In your opinion, does the proposed amendment address needs arising from a changing condition, trend or fact affecting the subject property and surrounding area?
Staff responded, yes, it has been found during excavations on building sites for new buildings the existence of old footings and foundation. This causes numerous issues for the property owner. From here on, we want to explicitly state that these items need to be removed during the demolition process.
I do have a question there, and that was regarding utilities in the foundation that exists. Does that just all get capped off by the street?
So, not necessarily in the street in this case, but we are requiring that all utilities are capped off. Kind of depends on what the public utilities find necessary. So for instance, if a project is being proposed to be redeveloped and they're doing the demolition of the building to start the redevelopment of the property, they might not require that the new property owner go all the way out into the street, cap it off, and then have to later bring in new utilities, cut open the street again and bring them in. So it's going to be on a case-by-case basis, but we will require that the utilities are capped, that they're not just left open.
Okay.
John, I've got a question in regards to that. So thinking back when I grew up in, like on South Minnesota Street, you know, every backyard had a well and it had a pump. And I actually tore a house down 25 years ago, and there was a well in the backyard, and it was concrete and brick and things of that nature. Are you factoring in saying that would be a utility serving that property? I mean, would
So-
we put that in addition? I'm just thinking back to the old grid work part of the town.
Sure, so old wells, old private wells, private property are managed by the State Department of Health.
Okay.
Anytime those are found during something like a demolition process, they would actually go through the state Minnesota Department of Health process to cap that, because you can't just cave it in or haul it out. It actually typically has to be sealed with something like bentonite clay to seal that well.
Sure.
So, good
I would
question.
ask.
So, I have a question since we're on this one specifically. You cited the one that's in wherever that was, right? Has there ever
Milwaukee?
been as an instance where that's happened in New Ulm?
You know, Elwood can probably speak to this better than I can, but maybe he would come up.
Yeah, Elwood's Elwood building official. Yeah, we've had numerous sites. Just had a new house this spring that was digging next door, and they've owned that property for 20, 30 years. When they started the excavation, they found old footing foundations. When we were doing the new pool addition, we found an old brick foundation that, again, nobody knew there was a farm there at one point. So it's not every one, but there's numerous ones. When they did demolitions back in the day, they just caved it into the basement and covered it up. So we're trying to prevent that we don't know about it or the homeowner doesn't know about it. And again, it occurs a big cost when they're not expecting it.
I can think of one from the city center apartment building where Mr. Kretsch, they got going and started digging, and they found a massive amount of concrete in one area from something.
Right,
that,
yeah.
That
So
was
it's
buried 50 years ago.
Yeah, it's just trying to curb that in the future here.
Isn't it also true that we sometimes find tree debris that gets dumped into a hole?
There's been cases where people have had to take off garages and stuff and redo them because they just buried trees underneath and they started rotting away and the structure started pulling away from the house.
I have an old fish pond in my backyard that's like
Well,
20
there's
feet long.
a lot of cisterns and stuff
Yeah.
around yet that some people use and some people are, and there's a cistern, we can just cave it in and then
Right.
fill it in and stuff. But be nice to get it out when we're doing a demo on a property.
Okay, so my final question on number 2, then, we are in agreement with the city assessment of that answer?
Yes,
Yes?
yes.
Thank you. Question number 3, in your opinion, is the proposed amendment consistent with achieving the goals and objectives outlined in the comprehensive plan?
Staff responded, yes, the proposed amendment is consistent with the goals and objectives outlined in the comprehensive plan. And then I had listed a number of locations within the comprehensive plan where we talk about essentially, making sure that developable property is available. And so land use goal number 1, maintain a city that is aesthetically pleasing, environmentally sound, and functional. Under that, we have section 1.2, which is use planning, land regulation, site plan review, and the design of public improvements need to act as a responsible steward of the environment and protect waterways, floodplains, wetlands, unique environmental areas, steep slopes, and wooded hilltops and ridge lines. Then we have that 1.7, use subdivision regulations and site plan review should ensure the quality design of residential, commercial, industrial, multiple family sites. So that it's not specifically talking about demolition, but what it's talking about is having sites available for that type of development. And for us, that means if there are things like footings and foundations that are buried there, for that site to be ready, that really needs to be removed. Then we had point number 1.9, encourage the maintenance and reinvestment in existing property to retain community character and prevent the creation and spread of blight. We also had land use goal number 3, create an economically vital and sustainable community. Point 3.3 provides new areas for a wide range of new industrial development. We do come across footings and foundations buried on industrial sites. We want to make sure those are clear if we are doing demolition in the future. 3.4, attract investment that creates a diverse and expanding property tax base and supply of customers for the municipal city utility systems. I can tell you that if a developer is going to come into a site, if they know it's free and clear and doesn't have any buried debris on it, that is a much more attractive site than having to go to something with something unknown on it. 3.6, provide functional, efficient, and attractive locations for long-term industrial and commercial investment that are supported by street and utility systems and compatible with adjacent land uses.
Are there any more questions for the city? So we have answered all the questions, so we have actually approved this.
I got another question.
Okay.
You said that you reached out to specific contractors for feedback?
We sent them letters noticing that we were going to be making an amendment to the ordinance.
Okay. So it wasn't just published in the journal, but it was also targeted
Yeah.
towards people that would be...
Doing demolition.
Okay, thanks.
And there was 3 that we typically work with in the area.
Yeah, thank
We're in agreement with?
Yeah.
Yeah.
this. Okay, then I'm going to go back to. Going back to page 3, there are 2 motions at the bottom of that page. I would need a motion for someone.
I'll make a motion to recommend approval of ordinance number 2024, making amendments to Appendix A of the City of New Ulm City Code.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second to approve. Are there any further questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Nothing. This portion of the public hearing for footings and foundations is closed. I would open for zoning amendment downtown residential parking requirements.
This particular matter it's a public hearing, and it is on a zoning amendment to reduce the required number of parking spaces for a residential unit in the downtown area zoning district, which is our B4 district, and we would reduce the number of stalls from the 2 to 1. And to accomplish this task, we need to modify 2 tables that are located in the zoning ordinance, and we'll get to the specifics of that in the staff report. The applicant in this case is the city of New Ulm. The comprehensive plan land use area is the downtown. Surrounding land uses to the downtown vary. We have business, we have public, semi-public, industry, park, open space, low and moderate, medium density residential. Zoning classification, as was indicated, is B4. Surrounding zoning, to the north, it's RT2, which is traditional neighborhood, single and two-family residence district, and B1, limited business district. To the south is RT2 and R4, which is high-density residence. To the east, it's RT2, R4, B1, I2, which is general industrial. And then to the west, it's RT2, B1, B2, which is general business district. Current site use in the downtown area is a mix of retail, financial, office, service, entertainment, public, institutional uses, and appropriately located residential uses. Area uses that surround the downtown are pretty much the same, with maybe more of an emphasis on residential. Notice of the public hearing was published in the Journal in the January 13th, 2024 edition. Public comment, we have not received any to date. A description of the proposed zoning ordinance changes. Upon the recommendation of the Planning Commission and pursuant to Sections 2.4B of Appendix A to the New Ulm City Code, the following is proposed to be amended. Number 1 is Chapter 9, Uses, Section 2.4, Use-Specific Standards, Table 9-4, which is in the B4 district, that residential development standards would be reduced for off-street parking, for new construction or the renovation of residential units from 2 stalls per unit to 1 stall per unit. The second table that would be changed is also found, Chapter 9 Uses, Section 10.7, which is off-street parking, Table 1010. And the minimum off-street parking standards, there we would add residential -B4 zoning district to the same use type with the requirement of 1 off-street parking stall per residential unit. And I would note that I think maybe in your attachment, in your agenda, it maybe just says B4 zoning district. And the residential part is important because that then tells us it's just residential. It's not any other use in the downtown area. So prior to the adoption of the new zoning ordinance in April of 2022, the parking requirement in the downtown was 1.5 off-street parking stalls per new residential unit. Downtown New Ulm has been experiencing strong interest and steady growth in the number of residential units in recent years. Historically, buildings in the downtown were designed to have the business located on the street level and residential units above for the owners of the business to reside. Most owners of businesses in the downtown area no longer live above their business, and in turn, many of these residential units have been rented out to other individuals looking for apartments or condominiums, or in some instances, they have just remained vacant. In the B4 zoning district, residential units on the upper floors are permitted, whereas residential units on the street level are required to obtain a conditional use permit. Property owners and members of the public have asked that the city consider reducing the parking requirement in the downtown for a residential unit from 2 per unit to 1 per unit. property owners or they note that downtown apartments are typically occupied by tenants with only one vehicle per unit, and the reduction in the parking requirement to one stall per unit may increase the interest or viability of adding new dwelling units in the downtown area. Parking at the location where the dwelling units exist or are proposed is often difficult to achieve at a rate of 2 stalls per residential unit and may require the property owner to secure those parking spaces off-site in order to meet the requirement. Would also note, that the reduction of parking requirements in the downtown for residential units only applies to off-street or non-public parking. On-street parking along Minnesota Street or in public parking lots cannot be used to meet the parking requirements unless the city council determines otherwise. Leased parking spaces in the downtown area on public or private lots can be used by residential tenants in the downtown. There are a total of 131 parking stalls available for lease on public parking lots in the downtown area. The downtown parking system, both public and private, has varying degrees of service obligations. The system is responsible for providing parking to customers, to employees, and to residents. The system has generally been able to provide sufficient parking to address the required parking needs of each group. The parking system, however, has not seen an expansion in the number of parking spaces for a fair amount of time. An increased demand for parking from the occupants of new residential units and the pending loss of parking underneath the Marketplaats Mall may change the current parking dynamics and present the need to increase the number of stalls in the system. This situation could also cause associated problems with maintenance and snow removal activities in the downtown area. It may be appropriate to examine this situation now or in the near future before it manifests itself as a problem in need of an immediate solution. We did a survey of 9 Minnesota communities similar in size to New Ulm and found that all allow residential units in their downtown areas, but with a variety of different conditions to secure approval. Parking requirements varied based on the type or number of units, the age of the occupant, or number of bedrooms. In general, the number of required parking stalls varied from 1 to 2+ per unit. The purpose of this zoning amendment, very simply, is to reduce the number of off-street parking stalls from 2 to 1. You have attachments. Attachment 1 is the proposed new ordinance. Attachment 2 is a survey that we conducted of Central Business District parking requirements in other communities, and Attachment 3 is the findings of fact. The approval process for a zoning amendment is the same as John just described for the demolition, and so I'm not going to repeat that if that's acceptable to the Planning Commission.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fine.
The Planning Commission's consideration is to ask you to find that the proposed amendment complies with the review criteria outlined in Appendix A of the city zoning ordinance. Are there additional or fewer requirements the Planning Commission would like to see incorporated into the amendment? Staff would recommend approval of the zoning amendment described in the proposed ordinance. The ordinance revision would allow more flexibility to developers and property owners in trying to locate additional residential units in the downtown area. Think Also, a number of the units in the downtown area are one-bedrooms, so the need for, 2 parking spaces may not be warranted in those kind of situations. And I guess we feel at the present time that there are sufficient parking available to take care of this change, but it is something that it needs to be monitored, and perhaps some discussions would be warranted as to what the future holds for parking in the downtown area. That leads us to the findings of fact portion of the staff report.
Are you doing the finding of facts, or is John doing the finding? Whoever, okay, I will read the first question, and whoever wants to pipe in can answer. In your opinion, does the proposed amendment correct an error in the original text or map?
Staff's response was no, the proposed amendment does not correct an error in the original text or map.
If I could just interject real quickly, for purposes of a rezoning amendment, of the first 2 items that are identified, you have to make a positive approval of only one of them. So
That's
that's
fine.
why we can say no to one and still, and for the next one, say yes, and then the amendment can be approved on that basis.
Thank you for the clarification. Question number 2, in your opinion, does the proposed amendment address needs arising from a change in condition, trend, or fact affecting the subject property and surrounding area?
Staff responded yes, this amendment addresses the need to reduce the burden on property owners and developers to find additional parking spaces for residential units in the central business district. Single-bedroom apartments in the downtown often only have 1 occupant and therefore only typically 1 vehicle per unit.
Okay, again, I have some questions. One of the questions I have is, I would be in agreement that most of the apartments downtown are single bedrooms, multiple apartments per building. So if there's 2 apartments, they need 2 stalls. What are you doing in a situation like Inspire, where you have the condominiums there? Would we not require them to have more than 1 parking place since the 2, 3 bedrooms?
Well, in the case of the Inspired project, there are 6 parking units in the basement of the building, so there's 2 parking spaces per unit. And that was the owner's decision to provide that number of stalls.
But if we should do that in another building?
Well, that was the owner's decision. They felt that made, I guess, the units more attractive. And so what we're saying is that the minimum would be 1 per unit.
So in the future, they could put up a condo situation like that, and the owner could decide to put in 1 parking place per unit?
Yeah.
And that would be acceptable?
That would be acceptable.
Okay.
But they also would have the option to put 2 or 3 or 4 if they wanted
Well,
to.
yeah, I understand that. I was just thinking that it may cause problems there, but so it's nothing that the city dictates at all, other than just 1 spot per resident. Okay.
So basically, Dave, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying you need a bare minimum.
Yeah.
You're stressing 1.
Yeah.
That's your number.
Right.
And if the developer chooses to add a second or a third, that's at their discretion.
Right.
But we're just setting that from this time forward, if you're going to renovate X, Y, and Z building, you're going to have 3 units in that building, you need 3 stalls.
Right.
We're not going to come in and say you need 2 or a total of 6
Right.
for 3 units.
Yeah.
At that point in time.
And that's off-street parking availability, right? So, like, for example, let's use Inspire, right? They have a basement garage, so that requirement is to have them build something that is off-street and not
Well-
along the street.
The spaces could be provided, I guess, a couple of different ways. One is they could do it on the property itself. It could be enclosed within a building, or it could be surface level parking at the rear of the property. The other option that we have accepted in the past is they could lease space in one of the city-owned parking lots, or they could lease space in another privately owned parking lot. We've accepted that as well. So those are kind of the options that would be available.
So the options are currently, as they always have been, basically then, because most buildings downtown have a spot right behind. Very few of them go to the alley, but if they do, then there's usually a lease spot for them. I don't know if there's,
Well, there's normally lease spots in the vicinity. Yeah,
but so it does free up space for the owner of the building to put other things, okay.
Or Dave, I mean, looking at some of the other cities here, they put restrictions like if it's a multifamily that you're going to need more units. Would we be more forward thinking that if we're going to have more multifamily, say a developer builds in the district, to have that option available for them so we don't sell ourselves short, you know? That would do it by conditional use permit or something in that regards, depending on the proposed project.
you know, to date, the discussion has been to, bring it down to just one. Obviously, if the commission feels that there's a better approach to this issue, we certainly can examine those, and you can, make a different recommendation. This one of the communities I noticed they based their parking requirement on the number of bedrooms.
Okay.
That was, I think there was only one community that did that. There were a variety of different approaches that were taken.
Correct. But I mean, we would have that opportunity to
Yes,
to discuss
Yep.
options.
yes.
Can you expand? You said that we're going to be losing the parking underneath the Mark Platts Mall. Can you expand on that?
The owner of the property, they have now consolidated ownership of all three parcels that make up the Marketplatz Mall. And with that comes ownership of the surface or the parking underneath the mall. And it is, the owner has advised us that it is his intent to close that parking off and that it would be used solely for use by future residents that would be residing on the current platform of the mall. So it will not be available to the public.
Do we know currently how much it's being used?
Well, it's kind of hard to gauge how much is currently being used since there's been different ownerships in place. Some of the spaces have been leased, but I would say the lease rate is minimal. It hasn't been very, I don't know, maybe 25% at most.
There still are the two city lots on either end of the mall.
Yeah.
The one by the movie theater and the one across from the telephone company, okay. That is not affected by the
No,
Marketplace.
and we also have, we do have lease space in the parking lot that is located behind Inspired. And I think some of those spaces are available.
I'm going to go back to question number 2, and I would like everyone to say whether they accept or reject that question, or if they're in agreement with that question. Linda?
I'm in agreement.
So, now that we're reducing from 1.5 to 1, from 2 to 1.
If I could just comment on that, previous to the adoption of the new zoning ordinance, the requirement was 1.5 for parking for an apartment building. And so that's what we used and applied to the downtown area. With the new zoning ordinance, we increased our requirement to 2 spaces per unit. Now we're suggesting that, recommending that it should be reduced down to 1.
Per apartment or per
Per
unit?
unit, per dwelling unit.
So what, do we know what the plan is for like George's falls inside of this area that we're, right?
Yes.
So that would reduce, what's the targeted population for those residential units that are going in there?
I think the total number of units is, okay,
Because we're targeting populations when we're building these developments, right? So we're saying, like, this development is gonna be targeted towards single family, and this development is gonna be multifamily or whatever, and that's the point of my question.
Yeah, so Chris Dalton, city manager. The current, I guess, population or makeup, these are going to be market rate apartments, mostly 1 bedroom with a very small handful of 2 bedrooms. So, a development like that, they're looking potentially 80-ish units. So they'd need 106 parking stalls, which is not feasible on something, a parcel that big. So bringing it down, it helps them pencil that out a little bit more because they're also going to have retail as part of that. So they'll have to meet those parking requirements as well.
There's a parking requirement for the retail parcels as well inside of that development?
Yeah.
And is that, what's the rate for that?
actually,
Depending
that's a
on-
decision of the developer to provide that parking. The city code in the B4 zoning district, we do not
Sure.
have any parking requirements for retail.
Okay.
So he'll have plenty of parking. When they initially did it, they had well over 100 parking stalls. They had a service slot potentially coming off the alley side and then underground parking coming off German. So ample parking for residents and people going to the businesses there. But they are going to be market rate apartments.
And how might this affect the development of the Market Plots Mall? I mean, I know there's he's got all that parking underneath.
Mhm.
That should be good enough for the requirement.
Under the new requirement, a little more feasible. On the other one, it was pretty close, or he needed to find other additional parking other places, right?
Well,
Potentially.
I don't know that the final number of dwelling units has yet been determined, but I think he probably would have been able to meet our two space requirement. Because there's, I don't know, there's over 100 plus stalls there.
Are those the two main development actions in that zone in the foreseeable future?
And that potentially yes, but when you look at let's go potentially the chamber might be looking at doing apartments upstairs. That's 3 apartments. If under the new one, they're going to have to find 6 stalls, and they don't have a place on their building to put 6 stalls. So we're lowering it to 3, helps out a little bit. But again, they're going to have to look at
That's
potentially
probably-
leasing, leasing some spots right behind them as well. So it helps as people start converting ones that don't have a place. It helps them be able to find at least some parking.
I think at this point in time, we don't envision any large-scale projects taking place in the downtown area, but rather what we will be looking at is probably, as was indicated, it'll be a unit here and a unit there, and it'll probably be spaces within existing buildings rather than new construction.
Okay.
I mean, would we maybe be wise or conservative to, if they're more multifamily, if it turns in that there's a 2-3 bedroom, that, the developer have to provide a second additional stall? I just kind of would hate to sell ourselves short that we went from 1.5 to 2 just 2 years ago to back down to 1 within 2 years, and we haven't even tested the waters, I guess, you
Can
know.
I assume from, and I kind of agree with that question, but can I ask an adjacent question, like, could it be the the responsibility of the rentee? If he's renting to a couple that both have jobs and both need cars, that it's part of their rent negotiation to supply that second stall if needed somewhere, rather than, I mean, do the one stall and then say, well, you know, I need 2 stalls, so it's part of his rent negotiation?
I don't know if we can require that. I mean, that's something where, you know, you
I'm
can
not saying require it, but that would be part of the renter's
potentially. I mean, a
potential questions.
landlord could potentially do that. You know, but we're all also looking at the hours for downtown. You know, again, it's why is there no overnight parking downtown? You know, those are potential units that, you know, spots that someone who lives in an apartment can park in overnight, you know, and then start the hours maybe a little bit earlier, you know, at 7 starts the hours. So they have to be out by the time businesses start opening. Because again, that's unused parking during the night that could be used. Again, you have snow emergency, stuff like that. I get it. But if they're renters, you know where they are. They're literally downtown. But you know, a kind of sidebar to that is legislation, or St. Paul is looking at eliminating minimum parking requirements for the state of Minnesota in general, just across the board, having 0 parking requirements. That's a bill that's probably going to be looked at this session. And so we'll see what that ultimately looks like. So again, lowering it to 1 will be kind of that dipping your toe in the water, because it could be 0 come the end of session.
Or could we just potentially go case by case as new projects are proposed and development, you know? I mean, and just, you know, and see where the foreseeable future comes with a project?
Maybe just let me answer a couple questions here. Going back to, have there been any indication as to whether this has been an issue? And we have had discussions with people who say, boy, if I convert units in my building and then I got to provide this many stalls, don't know how that's going to happen. So it has been a topic of concern about people that are maybe looking at it. As far as that particular situation, Larry, I believe if you looked at the survey that we did, I think it was St. Peter that had
They have multifamily, general,
yeah.
1.5, and limited.
Right, but then it says, unless required as a condition of approval resulting from review, all uses shall be exempt from providing off-street parking. So in their downtown area, they're probably just like us, they don't require any parking. But there's this provision that as a condition of approval, it could be. So that would maybe kind of address the situation that you're talking
Well,
about, Larry.
that's kind of when I was reviewing that one, and then kind of looking at, I think it was Stillwater here, and, you know, and just, you know, conditional use permit for all residential classes, and then stating two places, or 1 covered, or 1.5 spaces. And I think, I don't think we need to over micromanage it, but we might be able to put in a provision that, possibly for discussion.
I'm in agreement with Larry. I think that it would tax the downtown parking too much if we simply go to 1. If you have a 2-bedroom unit and 2 people, 2 cars, and we're only going to require 1, I just think it would tax the downtown parking further than what it already is.
Because right now it's kind of like a blank screen. We haven't seen anything, and nothing's come before us, say, for a project, and kind of looking to change it. It's
Well,
just,
we have
we know
approved, residential units in the downtown area, over the past, 10, 15 years. And, we've always assigned a parking requirement to them if they hadn't been used for residential purposes in the past. And it appears that, those property owners, those tenants have been able to, find, parking to date. How far that, were to continue in the future, I guess, that's unknown.
Chris, when did you say the state is voting on this?
It'll probably be this session,
So this would be a moot conversation if,
potentially, if they pass it, yeah. But as we have, again, it looks at, as we have projects that are coming in the pipeline, they need to know at least what our standard is, because that's what they're going to plan for. And again, I don't think any developer in their right mind, if it goes to zero, is going to put 0 parking spots, or at least the ones that we're currently talking to. Again, that doesn't mean there's other developers out there that would absolutely just build 0 if that was the requirement. But the ones that we're currently talking to, know they have to provide parking for their tenants, because no one's going to rent an apartment that doesn't have space, a spot for them.
right.
I would suggest that the legislation that city manager talked about maybe works in a larger metropolitan area,
Yeah.
but does not work in smaller outstate communities.
I'm surprised that we haven't heard anything from the public when you posted this.
We don't have any developers here in the audience today either. So
No, but downtown businesses
Yeah.
or,
I haven't had anybody approach myself,
Well, I think the people that are going to be affected potentially in a negative way are those future renters of those apartments, right? So they're not looking at, oh, I'm going to rent in downtown New Ulm next year, and then I should comment on that. That's the developers. It's a good move for the developers because it gives them more maneuverability in their planning, right? It's good for the downtown business owners that want to refurbish the apartments and the spaces above them because it gives them more an easier solution, right? The negative is for the multifamily that work in 2 different positions, and that's where they want to live, but now they got to find a second stall.
that's a good point, though. I mean, negatively, it would affect the landlord if they couldn't find a tenant due to the issue, and then they would have to
Yeah.
fix it.
Yeah, well, I think that's going to come in with the 0 parking spots. That's where it becomes, providing 1 is probably acceptable for most. If you need 2 stalls and you can't find it in the downtown, you go somewhere else, right? But if you need, right? If you, I don't know where I was going with that statement, I guess. Kind of lost it. But, you don't, with the 0 requirement, that becomes, all right, we got 180 apartments and we're not going to provide any parking. That becomes a pretty big hurdle for renters to overcome, especially in our situation.
Yeah.
So I agree with that. Yeah.
I really don't, I mean, this isn't New York City where you get 0 parking places with an apartment. People don't have cars either that they're trying to park. Because of that, I think if you have 1 stall and you're renting an apartment downtown, I think most of those apartments are 1 person occupied. However, if you're talking about a development, I think it should be based on the number, like St. Peter did with a number of bedroom units in the complex. If you have an apartment building downtown that has 3 one-bedroom unit apartments, they have to supply with this change 3 parking places because it's got 3 units. where, and odds are that they probably really don't need all 3 units, because I would think there's a lot of people living downtown that don't have cars currently, that are taking either the city bus or walking because they're working downtown. So either we take a vote on item 2 and send it back to the city, or we approve it now. So again, at this point, we've asked, does anyone have any other questions?
I have one more question. I thought at one point you had said the Georges project was looking at doing underground parking. Is that not the case?
Yep, they're still doing that.
They are doing that? Okay. Okay.
So again, I think does everybody have their questions asked and answered? I'm going to call on everyone to answer question number 2, whether they say yes or no to that question. Joe?
Yeah, I agree.
Michelle?
I agree.
I'm in agreement.
I'm in agreement.
I'm in agreement.
Agree.
Okay, I'm going to move on to question 3. In your opinion, is the proposed amendment consistent with achieving the goals and objectives outlined in the comprehensive plan?
Staff responded, yes, the proposed amendment is consistent with achieving the goals and objectives outlined in the comprehensive plan. Some comprehensive plan references that we had in the findings of fact were land use goal number 4, encouraging the continuing evolution of the downtown to vital and sustainable mixture of commercial, residential, and civic uses. Under that goal, we had 2 points we'd like to highlight. 4.2, which was allow additional housing in the downtown area as a means of expanding the market for the downtown businesses and as a source of new investment. Then we had point number 4.3, keep the primary civic functions of the community located in the downtown area to attract people to this area. In the 2007 comprehensive plan, there are a number of focus areas, one of which is the downtown. In that focus area, there is discussion of accommodation of residential land uses in the downtown, and that existing zoning regulations are needed to be properly managed, need to properly manage land uses in the downtown. It recognizes that particular attention should be given to the future of single-family housing stock in the downtown area. I should also note in numerous chapters, the land use chapter, parks chapter, historic preservation, and economic development, of the existing comprehensive plan, there is reference to supporting residential uses in the downtown area as well. Downtown residential uses will continue to be a focal point for planning in the future of New Ulm.
With that, we have basically approved this plan because we voted yes on number 2, correct?
Yeah.
Is
Maybe
everyone-
want to have a motion to, acknowledge that it's the consensus of the planning commission that the,
A motion to accept the approval?
yeah,
All right. Is there such a motion to accept the? Excuse me. Is there a motion to accept the city report
I'll make a motion to recommend approval
of the facts finding?
of the facts find, yes.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the facts finding report. Now I'd like to call for a motion on the downtown residential parking requirements. There's a
I think the action that you just took was to approve, it was a motion to approve the request.
okay.
She made a motion.
I was
to accept
going after the facts finding to make sure we had the facts finding report. The second motion is to accept the ordinance. Do you want it?
Typically, we don't have to make a recommendation or a motion on the findings of fact.
I agree.
So I don't know if you want to void that, but we would make the motion on whether or not to approve the recommendation of the zoning ordinance amendment.
Would you amend your motion?
Yes. I make a motion to recommend approval of the ordinance making amendments to Appendix A of the New Ulm City Code.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. Are there any further discussion?
I guess I'd like to see something if you have multifamily yet, possibly. I just, or if we could put an appendix or something like St. Peter did and for discussion, that, because if they have a 2 or 3 bedroom unit and they only have one spot, or granted, they'll have to go find it, or the developer, in those capacities, but I just get a little leery if we sell ourselves short for that opportunity, I guess.
Well, what we could do is contact the city of St. Peter and find out how this particular provision has worked for them. And I guess if we can bring that information back to you, and if it has merit, you can amend the amendment
Amend it later? Is that what you
at
said?
a later time, yeah.
I would appreciate that. I'll just, like I say, just, because we went from 1.5 to 2, now we go back to 1, and, they've had some revitalization and a couple new buildings and, in those regards, and kind of looking at other ones that are requiring 1.5, 2, and, in those regards, it's kind of hard to get a one size fits all, because we don't know the foreseeable future, say, for future new buildings, but I think we're all in a consensus as a commission. I kind of hear that a lot of units above a building are basically a 1-bedroom type unit, and that helps developers develop those versus that's how I take it.
Mhm.
You get back? Okay. I have a motion and a second on the floor. Any further discussion?
Could I just ask a clarifying question? So are you recommending that we approve it as written and bring it to the council, or would you like us to bring back a revised ordinance to the planning commission at the next meeting?
Is there anything hindering that it has to be decided today for recommendation and it goes to council? I mean, pending any major developments that, we come back in a month and we have a little bit more information to make a more judgmental decision that,
I believe you have a motion on the floor, though, to accept the reduction in the number of spaces from 2 to 1, so you probably need to take action on that before you do anything else.
So you can vote against the motion if you want.
Correct.
Okay, now I'm going to call for a vote. All in favor?
no.
No.
Would you
vote
call the
then?
roll?
Mr. Schatsko?
No.
Ms. Sellner?
No.
Ms. Earl?
Yes.
Mr. Mack?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm tied.
We have a tie. Which, if the motion was to approve the request, is it then approved? I guess we'll have to confer. What? Guys? Okay.
Hey, I have a question. Do we ever try to notify the downtown business owners in ways other than posting it in the newspaper? I'm wondering how many of those business owners were aware of.
We didn't send out letters directly to them regarding this proposed change.
I'm just wondering if they all saw it or not,
That's a typical thing, though. In most cities, you have to advertise it in the local, and that you just have to have one proof of advertising. It's up to
yeah.
the residents to have read it, so that's not unusual.
Yeah, I understand that. My concern is that they're not aware of it, and
Right.
after making,
I understand, yeah.
No, I agree with that concern because I know there was some parking spaces removed real close to my business that I was not aware of until I read it in the paper that they were approved and removed, and that was my parking space. So,
David, I have a question. How long would it take you to contact St. Peter, find this, would it be possible to do this at the February meeting?
Oh, sure. I would think so.
So I will change my vote so the motion fails. And you can come back to us at the next meeting.
Okay,
Is that acceptable?
sure.
All right. Motion has failed. That ends the the public hearing for the downtown residential parking requirements. I'm opening up to city reports, comprehensive plan progress report.
Before we get into the comprehensive plan, there was one other item that had been discussed in previous meetings, and one of the things that the commission has considered is, how do we be more efficient with the findings of fact?
With what? I'm sorry.
How do we be more efficient with going through the findings of fact?
Okay.
So we had been in contact with the city attorney, and he agrees that if we go through the findings of fact, or if the findings of fact find on the staff's behalf that they are all in a setup to approve whatever is being requested, if the whole planning commission agrees on that and they're all for approval, then we can skip reading through each individual question and each individual response. If there is any dissent, or if someone doesn't agree, or if there is one of the findings was that we shouldn't approve it, then we should go through each finding and recite the reasoning for each one. So I just wanted to provide everybody that information that might make things move along a little bit faster in the future.
Sure.
Or more confusing. Thank you, John. Comprehensive plan.
Okay. Comprehensive plan update. So yesterday we had a meeting with the consultant from SEH. It's been a while since we've met with him. At that meeting, we discussed the status of where we're at in our review process and how we want to be working back and forth. After that discussion, we decided with the consultant that we would be sending him chapters that we've already been through, made numerous proposed changes, and then we send it back to them for their review, and they send us back something that looks more like a finished product. Yesterday, we sent them chapters 1 through 3. And the goal is to send them at least a couple more chapters by next Tuesday. There are a total of 10 chapters in the comprehensive plan. Following chapter 7, or 8, 9, and 10, those chapters should be the review process, or the final review process should be very fast on those. It shouldn't take very long. It is our goal to have the comp plan, or at least the draft of the comp plan, to the Planning Commission at the February meeting. That meeting is February 29th. At the same time, we are also working with the consultant to create a number of new maps that weren't included in the comp plan, and to make sure that those are correct and available to the public when they get the plan. Obviously, this is taking longer than we were hoping for, but the amount of amendments we've had to make to this plan has been quite substantial. So that's what's taking this process so long. So if you guys have any questions on that.
Yes, I have a
Well,
question
just,
regarding.
if I might add that we also have a meeting scheduled with them next Tuesday to go through chapters 1 through 3. So we're trying to accelerate this process. And both the consultant and staff want to get this completed as quickly as possible, and yet we want it to be a good product that we end up with.
Do you feel we'll have something at the February's meeting for the planning?
That's the goal. It depends on how the review process ends up going between us and the consultant.
What about the review process amongst ourselves? Are we going to see it before the February meeting so that we don't get presented it at the February meeting and then not have time to have digested it and/or make notes that we have questions or changes that we feel are parts are missing.
And then or tie into that, into February meeting would that be the public meeting that they would hear this for the first time?
Well, no, we would schedule a public hearing before it goes to the city council, or not a public hearing, I should say, a public open house before it goes to the city council.
So if we would get it before the Tuesday before the meeting.
That would be the goal.
We would get it before that.
Yeah.
Because it would be, 2 days isn't going to be enough for us to digest it. Okay. Can I ask a question, whether it was a total disconnect between what they thought that we were requesting, or was it just a total disconnect?
How do I put this in a, how do I put this in a professional?
Politically correct?
Yeah, generally, the sense when you're reading through what we have as a draft is designed for a metropolitan type situation. And we feel pretty strongly that this comp plan should be designed for New Ulm and how New Ulm functions and for the residents of New Ulm. That's why we're making so many amendments.
I would say that the plan that they prepared focused a lot on the downtown, and it focused on the issues of mobility, which is biking and walking. And, a comprehensive plan is supposed to be that. It's supposed to be comprehensive. And so, we thought that we needed to pay attention or address some other issues, other areas of the community that perhaps, aren't part of those. So we wanted to broaden it a little bit. And the other thing is that this document serves as kind of a piece of history. It kind of marks where we're at this point in time when we approve it. And so we wanted information in there about the community itself that kind of serves that purpose as well.
Yeah, I understand that, and I do think back to some of the negotiation meetings that we had, and they would focus on smaller areas, and if this is supposed to cover 20 years, we should cover 20 years into the future. Okay. Is there anything else to report on? Does anyone have questions?
I just wanted to note one more thing on the comprehensive plan. I think it was brought up. What's the difference between the comprehensive plan and the strategic plan?
That was next.
Sure. So, I'm just going to kind of put this in general. The comprehensive plan it comes out of state statute, which allows local units of government to come up with long-range plans regarding the vision, the land uses, and also improvements in a long time period, typically over a 20-year time period. It's also very broad, so it looks at things kind of generally. So what a comprehensive plan recommendation might be that this 40 acres north of the existing city limits, we hope to be, or we're planning to be, low-density residential in the future. So it looks at that and it kind of guides it in that direction. At that same time, it also provides residents in those areas some sense of what's going to be happening in their neighborhood, or businesses, what might be happening in their neighborhoods. Whereas a strategic plan is typically much shorter in focus, somewhere around that 5-year time period, and it's specific to what the council, city staff, and the residents want to see. So it's kind of setting up goals and how do we achieve those goals in a short time period. So a good example of that might be, in 5 years, we want to have 2 new splash pads, one at Lincoln Park, one at Washington. So it sets up goals that are very specific and on a shorter time frame. So that's one of kind of the differences between the two, to summarize.
Yeah. I would also note that a comprehensive plan is very simply is a physical development plan. It's where your street goes, where your parks go, what kind of land use. There's 3 characteristics: general, comprehensive, and I'm missing the third one. But it's it's unique. A strategic plan is a different type of planning process.
So, John, on that, with the strategic plan, is that revisited every year for that next year in the cycle? Is that?
So typically you'll have, it'll be a 3 to 5 year plan, maybe some longer range goals. But as you go through the plan, and it might not be every year, might be every other year, hey, we started checking these off. Do we add more goals, or hey, landscape has shifted, we're not going to focus on this anymore. So really it boils down to really getting the city a vision, vision statement, mission statement. Here are, you're going to probably look between 6 to 8 priorities of the city. Then under those priorities, what are the goals for each of those priorities? And then the consultant will take that information and create strategies under that, and that's what eventually would be adopted. And that's where we're looking for, public feedback for what the priorities are going to be. Then the consultant put all that information together, present that to council, and then council will say, okay, these are the 6 priorities that we want as a city to focus on. Then those priorities will go out and ask the public, hey, what are the goals under these priorities? And then everyone will be able to have that input. Consultant will compile that, bring that information to council, and then same process. And then once that is set, it'll go to the consultant to draft those strategies, and then that document will be presented to the public for input, and then ultimately for the council for adoption.
Yeah, I would say a strategic plan covers things above and beyond physical development items. It can be something as to how do we present our services. We want to be more welcoming. We want to do a better job at, how we interact with our citizens. We want to have more neighborhood meetings. I mean, it's more than just, land use related issues.
Okay. I
Yeah,
wanna
but it does
thank
take
you.
into-
I happen to know a lot of people read the journal because I got a lot of questions, and I got a text today from Commissioner Mako with a whole list of questions to ask, and what the public from the public and what their input was, and it was a lot of people were concerned about hiring another consultant. Didn't we just do a public thing and hiring another consultant? Well, you're kind of answering the question there by saying it's a whole different set of parameters. And I was amazed at how many people stopped me downtown and to ask me, and I'm going, Chris Dalton didn't call me. But he was in the journal, and it said he was coming to the planning commission. So I want to thank you for coming to.
Yeah, I mean, it's the foundation. The zoning is the foundation to the comprehensive. Comprehensive is foundation for almost any other plan we're going to do. Because again, it's strategic plan. There's going to be marketing branding plan. There's going to be park and rec plan. I mean, there's going to be plenty of things to lay out foundations. But then citizens are going to know, here are the things we're working on. Council will know if they don't fund a certain thing, we're not working on that priority and goal. Again, it just helps make things run a little bit smoother.
Thank you. Readership on the journal is high. That's all I can say. Does anyone else have questions for? Thank you. I'm going to move on to city council decisions considering.
Okay, we'll do this quickly. At the January 2nd meeting, they unanimously approved the simple lot division of Lot 5, Block 1, Knollwood Edition. That was submitted by Benjamin and Christine Ager, 1632 Center Street was the location. At the January 16th meeting, they didn't consider any items that had come from Planning Commission recommendations, but some things did happen at that meeting that you might find of interest. The first is that they authorized the staff to receive and open bids for a new battery building, be located out at the trap range. Second thing is they reserved funds in the amount of $500,000 for the demolition of Georgia's Ballroom, and Brown County is expected to agree to a similar obligation. Third thing is they approved an RFP for services to prepare a strategic plan, and a draft copy of that was presented at the meeting, and you received a copy of that just prior to the meeting. The fourth thing is they authorized a settlement agreement and quitclaim deed to acquire 2 parcels of property from Hope Housing Foundation, Dreamville, New Ulm. So that was the project that we issued approval of, planned unit development. And then they authorized use of the city's affordable housing aid in the amount of $45,000 to redeem the property. On a completely different matter, at the last meeting, we talked about the Lakeside Village and the lots that were in tax forfeiture. And at that time, we talked about the fact that the property owners could initiate an amendment process and that 75% of them had to sign. City attorney had advised us after looking at the covenants that anybody that has a mortgage against the property, they have to sign too, which would make the process probably take more time and
In the whole development, every one of those that are mortgaged?
yeah. That would conclude the report.
Heritage Preservation, no report. Thank you very much. Is there any other business to come before the commission? If not, we stand adjourned. Thank you all. It's a good participation.